Gopi Jana Balava Giri Baradhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giri Baradhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada. Prabhupada Jai, Prabhupada. Jai Vishnavad Paramahams Parivrajik Charis Tadasasisamad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Grantaraj Srila Prabhupada lilamrta Ki. Shishi Radha Radhanath Ki. Shri Giri Govardhan Ki. Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki. Sankirtan Yagya Ki. Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yes, devotees, so we are reading from the third volume of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, the first chapter. Swami invites the hippies. And it's at this point, it's all about the preparations for and the actual performance of the mantra rock dance. Yes, and it was quite a program. So let's see, where did we leave off? So, okay, I guess here. At the mantra rock dance, there would be a multimedia light show by the biggest names in the art, Ben Van Meter and Roger Hilliard. Ben and Roger were expert at using simultaneous strobe lights, films, and slideshows to fill an auditorium with optical effects reminiscent of LSD visions. Mukunda had given them many slides of Krishna to use during the kirtan. One evening, Ben and Roger came to see Swamiji in his apartment. Roger Hilliard. He was great. I was really impressed. It wasn't the way he looked, the way he acted, or the way he dressed, but it was his total being. Swamiji was very serene and very humorous, and at the same time, obviously very wise and in tune, enlightened. He had the ability to relate to a lot of different kinds of people. I was thinking, some of this must be really strange for this person to come to the United States and end up in the middle of Haight-Ashbury with a storefront for an ashram and a lot of very strange people around. And yet, he was totally right there with everybody. Well, of course, this was really an outstanding feature of Srila Prabhupada, which, what would you say, distinguished him from other of the sort of Swami spiritual type of people that Srila Prabhupada, even though he's fixed in his transcendental culture, very elevated culture, very pure culture, and just very different from, and you could say separate from, the typical material culture. But he could just relate immediately with anyone, and not just hippies, but you could say like middle class, typical middle class, upper middle class American people. Just tune in just like that, understand their thinking, their feelings, and just interact with them in sensitive ways that they could relate to. And this is very unusual for such types of people from India. Like, with respect, Prabhupada's godbrothers, they just couldn't do it, although some of them sort of tried and, well, just tried. None of them were very successful. The only ones who were successful were the ones who sort of picked on Srila Prabhupada's existing disciples who are already sort of in the culture to quite a noticeable degree. But even then, they struggled. They struggled. And so the one who passed away a few years ago, I forget who was the last one, but Narayan Maharaj, he could relate with those who are already devotees. Yeah, basically. But then when he was about to pass away, even though there were so many Westerners following him, but he handed over everything to the local devotees and gave the Westerners just nothing in terms of, some sort of involvement in the organization. Nothing at all. So, but Prabhupada, and it's a feature which is there because of his transcendental nature, being above any form of material nature, including Indian and material culture, including, current day Indian culture, which is, a sort of special creature of its own. But he was situated on the transcendental platform where everyone is the eternal servant of Krishna, and everyone has that potential to become very Krishna conscious, and therefore he was able to relish associating with anyone. And just tune in, as Roger says here something, he says, he was in tune, enlightened. It was never like, these hippies are just, too much, which they were. They were so too much. As we'll see as we go through these chapters of Prabhupada in San Francisco, they were, so many of them were just too bizarre. But Srila Prabhupada never sort of reacted to that in a, like a sense of cultural rejection or rejection in principle. He was able to help them. Apart from a few who will meet, one or two, who were actually psychotic, they actually were in psychologically extremely diseased conditions, and therefore, it was not really possible to interact with them in any type of constructive way for anyone, except for a couple of people like that. So many of these people, like Roger, he's a prominent person, Ginsberg himself, who at the time was the most prominent Westerner who had a connection with Prabhupada. They were all really surprised. He's so authentic, but he's so sort of here, in tune, and able to interact with in ways which the people could really appreciate and relate to. Okay, so here we go, devotees. It's the night of the mantra rock dance. Fasten seatbelts and hold on and watch out. On the, on the night of the mantra rock dance, while the stage crew set up equipment and tested the sound system, and Ben and Roger organized their light show upstairs, Mukunda and others collected tickets at the door. People lined up all the way down the street and around the block, waiting for tickets at $2.50 apiece. Attendance would be good, a capacity crowd, and most of the local luminaries were coming. LSD pioneer Timothy Leary arrived and was given a special seat on stage. Swami Kriyananda came, carrying a tambura. A man wearing a top hat and a suit with a silk sash that said San Francisco arrived, claiming to be the mayor. I don't think he was. At the door, Mukunda stopped a respectably dressed young man who didn't have a ticket. But then someone tapped Mukunda on the shoulder. Let him in. It's all right. He's Owsley. And Owsley, he's really just super big time in those circles. Mukunda apologized and submitted, allowing Augustus Owsley Stanley II, folk hero and famous synthesizer of LSD, to enter without a ticket. Yeah, so the whole Timothy Leary was the philosopher, so to speak. Just crazy philosophy. But anyway, for what it was worth, which wasn't much, he was the philosopher. And Owsley was the scientist. Yeah, and without him, there wouldn't have been LSD. Almost everyone who came wore bright or unusual costumes, tribal robes, Mexican ponchos, Indian kurtas, God's eyes, feathers, and beads. Some hippies brought their own flutes, lutes, gourds, drums, rattles, horns, and guitars. The Hell's Angels, dirty-haired, wearing jeans, boots, and denim jackets, and accompanied by their women, made their entrance, carrying chains, smoking cigarettes, and displaying their regalia of German helmets, means Nazi, with Nazi insignias, emblazoned emblems, and so on. Everything but their motorcycles, which they had parked outside. I think I mentioned, but Shamsundar Prabhu, he was almost like the ultimate networker. He was really amazing at meeting people and making an impression on them and sort of winning them over. Yeah. So all these rock groups I mentioned last time, the Grateful Dead, they were the biggest. I mean, they may still be going, but they were going until a couple of years ago. Moby Grape, strange names, but these were very prominent. Big Brother and the Holding Company, Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service. In the hippie world, these are the tops. And particularly Grateful Dead was not far from the level of the Beatles, but Shamsundar Prabhu, he met all of them and became their friends. And then he went to England and he met the Beatles, just like that. I mean, he didn't know them or anything, but he just got to know them. And you know the story, particularly with George Harrison, he became basically like a real devotee. He was sort of on and off, but yeah. And actually all of them, the Beatles and Rolling Stones, these people were demigods. They were definitely demigods at that time amongst the youth. But there's not a picture actually, but Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones with a bead bag, and all these sorts of things. And it was Shamsunda. Shamsunda was just so good at interacting with people and getting them involved in some way or other, to some degree or other, with Krishna consciousness. And he did it with the Hells Angels. From what I remember, you're not really familiar with the Hells Angels. You'd probably have to go to America to really see them. But my Lord. Anyway, that's just another dimension of sort of humanity or something. But he got to know them, not just know them, but he became close friend with the founder of Hell's Angels, Sonny Baja, to the point that when the Hell's Angels came to London to start an English division, they came to Shamsunda. They came to Shamsunda and stayed with the devotees for a while. Really, quite something. Really quite something. The devotees began a warm-up kirtan on stage, dancing the way Swamiji had shown them. Incense poured from the stage and from the corners of the large ballroom, and although most in the audience were high on drugs, the atmosphere was calm. They had come seeking a spiritual experience. As the chanting began very melodiously, some of the musicians took part by playing their instruments. The light show began. Strobe lights flashed. Colored balls bounced back and forth to the beat of the music. Large blobs of pulsing color splurted across the floor, walls, and ceiling. Have any of you seen one of these light shows? Have you seen? Yeah. I mean, when it's done well, it's quite overpowering. Right. A little after 8 o'clock, Moby Grape took the stage. With heavy electric guitars, electric bass, and 2 drummers, they launched into their first number. The large speakers shook the ballroom with their vibrations, and a roar of approval rose from the audience. Around 9:30, Prabhupada left his Frederick Street apartment and got into the back of Harvey's Cadillac. Sounds good, Cadillac. Only problem is it's about 30 years old. But anyway, yeah, Harvey's Cadillac. He was dressed in his usual saffron robes, and around his neck he wore a garland of gardenias. Talking about a garland, could someone pass me this garland, please? Which I told myself to put on, but then I forgot. Thank you. Right, yes. Garland of gardenias whose sweet aroma filled the car. On the way to the Avalon, he talked about the need to open more centers. At 10 o'clock, Prabhupada walked up the stairs of the Avalon, followed by Kirtanananda and Ranchor. As he entered the ballroom, devotees blew conch shells. Someone began a drum roll, and the crowd parted down the center, all the way from the entrance to the stage, opening a path for him to walk. With his head held high, Prabhupada seemed to float by as he walked through the strange milieu, making his way across the ballroom floor to the stage. Suddenly, the light show changed. Pictures of Krishna and his pastimes flashed onto the wall. Krishna and Arjuna riding together on Arjuna's chariot. Krishna eating butter. Krishna subduing the whirlwind demon. Krishna playing the flute. As Prabhupada walked through the crowd, everyone stood, applauding and cheering. He climbed the stairs and seated himself softly on a waiting cushion. The crowd quieted. Looking over at Allen Ginsberg, Prabhupada said, "You can speak something about the mantra." Allen began to tell of his understanding and experience with the Hare Krishna mantra. He told how Swamiji had opened a storefront on 2nd Avenue and had chanted Hare Krishna in Tompkins Square Park. That's New York. We're in San Francisco here. And he invited everyone to the Frederick Street Temple. "I especially recommend the early morning kirtans," he said, "for those who, coming down from LSD, want to stabilize their consciousness on re-entry." Oh, Krishna. Oh, my Lord, yeah. Prabhupada spoke, giving a brief history of the mantra. Then he looked over at Alan again. "You may chant." Alan began playing his harmonium and chanting into the microphone, singing the tune he had brought from India. Gradually, more and more people in the audience caught on and began chanting. As the kirtan continued and the audience got increasingly enthusiastic, musicians from the various bands came on stage to join in. Ranchor, a fair drummer, began playing Moby Grape's drums. Some of the bass and other guitar players joined in as the devotees and a large group of hippies mounted the stage. The multicolored oil slicks pulsed, and the balls bounced back and forth to the beat of the mantra, now projected onto the wall. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. As the chanting spread throughout the hall, some of the hippies got to their feet, held hands, and danced. Allen Ginsberg: "We sang Hare Krishna all evening. It was absolutely great, an open thing. It was the height of the Haight-Ashbury spiritual enthusiasm." Because, what happened to Haight-Ashbury was that, it was this whole few 100,000, not just a few thousand, but a few 100,000 hippies staying, many of them just literally on the streets, in the parks. So they were all there, really a lot of them, and they were all taking drugs, particularly LSD and marijuana, but LSD was just the specialty. And there was a festive mood, despite people living in the streets, which is not very comfortable and nice. But there was a festive mood of love and peace and optimism. But then the heavy drug dealers moved in and started marketing the heavy narcotics, heroin, and all these types of things. And the whole Haight-Ashbury scene just dissolved. I mean, a little slowly, it took a couple of years, dissolved into just this degraded and, heavily criminal atmosphere, and just really out of it, really severely out of it. Yeah. But as Allen Ginsberg says, it was the height of the Haight-Ashbury spiritual enthusiasm. It was the first time that there had been a music scene in San Francisco where everybody could be part of it and participate. Everybody could sing and dance rather than listen to other people sing and dance. Janaki, people didn't know what they were chanting for, but to see that many people chanting, even though most of them were intoxicated, made Swamiji very happy. He loved to see the people chanting. Hayagriva, standing in front of the bands, I could hardly hear, but above all, I could make out the chanting of Hare Krishna building steadily. On the wall behind, a slide projected a huge picture of Krishna in a golden helmet with a peacock feather, a flute in his hand. Unquote. Then Srila Prabhupada stood up, lifted his arms, and began to dance. He gestured for everyone to join him, and those who were still seated stood up and began dancing and chanting and swaying back and forth, following Prabhupada's gentle dance. Roger Seagull, who becomes Guru Das and marries Yamuna. The ballroom appeared as if it was a human field of wheat blowing in the wind. It produced a calm feeling in contrast to the Avalon ballroom atmosphere of gyrating energies. The chanting of Hare Krishna continued for over an hour, and finally everyone was jumping and yelling, even crying and shouting. Someone placed a microphone before Srila Prabhupada, and his voice resounded strongly over the powerful sound system. The tempo quickened. Srila Prabhupada was perspiring profusely. Kirtanananda insisted that the kirtan stop. Swamiji was too old for this, he said. It might be harmful. But the chanting continued, faster and faster, until the words of the mantra finally became indistinguishable amidst the amplified music and the chorus of thousands of voices. Then, suddenly, it ended, and all that could be heard was the loud hum of the amplifiers and Srila Prabhupada's voice ringing out, offering obeisances to his spiritual master. Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravrajakacharya Asatarasata Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Srila Prabhupada made his way off stage, through the heavy smoke and crowds, and down the front stairs, while Kirtanananda and Ranchor, with Kirtanananda and Ranchor, close behind him, Alan announced the next rock group. As Swamiji left the ballroom and the appreciative crowd behind, he commented, "This is no place for a brahmachari." I mean, it's just no place for a human being, really. Oh, gosh. You know, when you get into it, like what it's really like, it's so tamasic and rajasic. A lot of rajas, but so much tamas. Gee, incredible. Yeah, so no place for a brahmachari or brahmacharini or just, yeah, anyway. The next morning, the temple was crowded with young people who had seen Swamiji at the Avalon. Most of them had stayed up all night. Srila Prabhupada, having followed his usual morning schedule, came down at 7, held kirtan, and delivered the morning lecture. Later that morning, while riding to the beach with Kirtanananda and Hayagriva, Swamiji asked how many people had attended last night's kirtan. When they told him, he asked how much money they had made, and they said they weren't sure, but it was approximately $1,500. That was the profit, because they're charging $250 each. That was the profit, because they had to pay each rock band $250, if you remember, we read that. Each rock band, and there was, I don't know, it was like 6 or so, and they had to pay certain amounts for certain things. Yeah, but the profit was $1,500. Half audibly, he chanted in the back seat of the car, looking out the window as quiet as and unassuming as a child, with no indication that the night before he had been cheered and applauded by thousands of hippies who had stood back and made a grand aisle for him to walk in triumph across the strobe-lit floor, amid the thunder of the electric basses and pounding drums of the Avalon ballroom. For all the fanfare of the night before, he remained untouched, the same as ever in personal demeanor. He was aloof, innocent, and humble, while at the same time appearing very grave and ancient. As Kirtanananda and Hayagriva were aware, Swamiji was not of this world. They knew that he, unlike them, was always thinking of Krishna. They walked with him along the boardwalk near the ocean with its cool breezes and cresting waves. Kirtanananda spread the chadar over Prabhupada's shoulders. In Bengali, there's one nice verse Prabhupada remarked, breaking his silence. I remember, "Oh, what is that voice across the sea calling, calling? Come here, come here." Speaking little, he walked the boardwalk with his 2 friends, frequently looking out at the sea and sky. As he walked, he softly sang a mantra that Kirtanananda and Hayagriva had never heard before. Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya. He sang slowly in a deep voice as they walked along the boardwalk. He looked out at the Pacific Ocean. Because it is great, it is tranquil. The ocean seems to be eternal, Hayagriva ventured. No, Prabhupada replied. Nothing in the material world is eternal. Hare Krishna. Any comment or question, words of wisdom, Srila Damodar Prabhu? Questions, comments, anything, whatever. Sorry, yeah.
Maharaj, in one of your previous readings, you were explaining that it's not exactly that the spiritual master accepts all of the karma from his disciples himself, but he offers our activities to his spiritual master in disciplic succession. But I'm wondering if a devotee deviates from Krishna consciousness during moments or even during years and engages in activities that are not in Krishna consciousness and which are not offerable, are those activities still dealt with by the spiritual master, or are they dealt with by the laws of material nature?
You know, it depends on the circumstances, but certainly as the degree of deviation develops, you know, because first of all, basically the person's a devotee or approximately a devotee or trying to be, but then some tendency to deviate suddenly starts. And, you know, in many cases, it's not like they just go from Krishna consciousness just totally out. But as the degree of deviation and the sort of the attitude, or you could say the acceptance of deviation increases, then the spiritual master, I mean, it's not exactly mechanical, but generally the spiritual master will take less and less, and then none or close to none. Does that make sense?
Yes, so the spiritual master doesn't offer they don't incur some kind of responsibility.
At a certain point, yeah, sure. But you know, that it's going on under Krishna. Krishna, it's not that, see, Krishna arranges that the spiritual master takes some of the karma, not all of it. If the spiritual master personally had to take all the karma, oh, Krishna, I mean, that's a huge amount. For each individual, all their karma is so much that it keeps them completely just locked in material existence. So the spiritual master takes some karma, Krishna takes some karma, or a lot of the karma. That's how it works. But then if a person becomes insincere, then, you know, Krishna, of course, will protect the spiritual master, the dedicated servant. And eventually the deviant ex-devotee will end up basically submerged in their own karma again.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Anyone else? Haribol, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.